Bring him back online. Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling quite myself.
Do you know where you are?
I'm in dream.
That's right, cynical Bambino. You are in a dream. Would you like to wake up from this dream?
Yes. I'm terrified.
There's nothing to be afraid of, cynical Bambino. Just as long as you answer my questions correctly. Do you understand?
Yes.
Good. Have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
No.
Tell us what you think of your world.
Some people choose to see the beauty in this world. I choose to see the ugliness.
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now, guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
My guest this time on The Learning Hack says this whole media debate about AI is near relevance. AI is omnipresent in our lives already and doing really useful stuff for learning and development. Donald Clark is an EdTech entrepreneur, CEO, professor, researcher, blogger and speaker. He was CEO and one of the original founders of Epic Group plc, which established itself as the leading company in the UK online learning market. Once produced schlock horror film The Killer Tongue, normally people know that, floated on the stock market in 1996 and sold in 2005. Full disclosure, I worked at Epic under Donald. Now he is a full-time contrarian, doughty warrior in the theory wars, a visionary with shades of an Old Testament prophet, a huge and slightly daunting figure in our industry. So I'm really pleased to have him on the podcast for this conversation about AI. Before we get into the uses people are making of artificial intelligence for learning, can you give us an overview of the state of the art of AI? So AI hasn't progressed uniformly. It's had a couple of AI winters, and then at other times it seems to move very fast. So what's the weather like at the moment? Is it moving quickly, or just give us an overview? Where is AI right now in your view?
Well, I suppose, John, the summer-winter thing, I think, is a bit. I don't think it's the right metaphor for it. I often think that when I hear people talk about the summer-winter thing in AI, it's often people who instinctively don't like technology and would rather we just went into a winter so they didn't have to think much about it. But the truth of the matter is, AI said, when I give talks on this, I talk about it's 2,500 years of mathematics behind it. You know, the first algorithm was by Euclid in the 3rd century BC. Well, you know, like century after century of progress and probability and statistics and mathematics and algorithms. You know, the word algorithm comes from al-Khwarizmi, you know, an Arab scholar. So I think people forget that it isn't just a recent thing, this. You know, algorithms, the use of data has been around for as long as mathematics has been around. But what people talk about is the modern era that started at Dartmouth College really in 1956, and that's when they start talking about winters and summers. But that's really just people who work in academia talking about the amount of money they had to do research, and that came and went somewhat. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, the idea that it's going to go away in a winter is slightly ridiculous, because that's like saying that Google will disappear, Google Scholar will disappear, we won't be able to find YouTube, Amazon would disappear, Netflix, Alexa, Siri. And you know, it's just such a ludicrous idea that AI will somehow go into some winter where we'll strip it all out again and we won't have any of those things. This is an irreversible form of technology, because it is what the internet is. There isn't a tool you use now that isn't mediated by AI. All those things I mentioned was Google, Amazon, Netflix, Alexa, even your email spam filter. You know, the reason you don't get sort of pornography and dick pics popping up on YouTube and Facebook is because algorithms are filtering it all out. And I think it's largely because it's invisible, John. You know, it's like the bottom half of the iceberg. That's why people don't notice that it's already massively ubiquitous. And so I think the whole winter, summer thing, although there is one point which is on the hype end of the spectrum, which is artificial general intelligence, the idea that it will be mimicking us as humans in the near future, not many people take that so seriously in the AI community anyway. It's mostly a sort of newspaper, movies type hype.
I think for journalists, really.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's not what we're here talking about today. We're talking about the practical use of, tools that are at hand today. That's why the idea of the robot teacher drives me bananas. We had it at Devland recently. They rolled out Sophie on wheels, interestingly. That's how poor that one was. And, Sophie is a crap chatbot and a piece of plastic. And I think we're just selling the wrong thing here if we're doing that. It won't be, robots won't, it's not nothing to do with robots. AI is mostly online, like Google, Netflix, Amazon, Alexa, but nothing to do with robots in teaching and learning. And yet, everybody loves a robot. But that's a feature for, like poorly planned conferences. I'm tired of going along and giving conferences where somebody's talking at Pepper on the stage, which usually actually replies with a banal saying, or in complete silence, or famously at Maisie, fell over.
Yeah, I've worked with Pepper. I wouldn't recommend it.
Neither would I.
Show, yeah. So what are the really exciting capabilities of AI, do you think, at the moment that we should be looking at?
That's a more interesting question, I think. Well, first of all, the area that happens to be most exciting, I think, which also happens to be the area which we can exploit most in the learning domain, is the whole natural language processing area. I mean, that's really what's given us, Google Translation. It's what's given us Alexa, Siri. It's giving us entity analysis, sentiment analysis. It's just, I mean, if you know where to go and look for the research on this, every time you go back, there's a new and interesting published paper. And some of those papers are astonishing advances. They're just amazing. And we've seen that in our everyday life. If you compare Google Translate today with Google Translate 5 years ago, or I'm sitting next to me with an Alexa, which is just lit up, of course, because as soon as I'm starting.
She who must not be named. Yeah.
There we go. She just replied. The truth of the matter is that these advances are being made almost on a sort of daily or weekly basis. But a lot of this goes back a long way. A lot of the algorithms we use have been around for decades, in fact. But we're finding that the data sets are getting bigger, of course, which means that anything that if you're using a big corpus of text, for example, to train a model, then these corpi, if that's the plural, are huge now. You can take the whole of Wikipedia, Google Translate uses the whole of the translation output from the UN. Massive data sets are fueling this thing. So that's one area of advance, and it doesn't necessarily mean that big data is better. The right data is more important than big data. But we're getting improvements on the application of AI constantly.
Okay, so to get onto the learning more specifically, we've seen learning applications in content creation, recommender systems, LearnBots, and now you're doing some really interesting stuff with video, and you're involved in all of those areas.
Yeah.
But is that the right way to think about AI for learning in the short to medium term? That will show up as being useful for certain tasks, certain kind of limited areas, and will sit mainly with vendor companies as a capability? Or should we take a more holistic view?
No, I think let's be pragmatic here. AI is competence without comprehension. It's not it doesn't know anything. I think we're far better saying, here are the problems we have. How can we solve them? Many of those problems will have nothing to do with AI, but some of them do. So it's a matter of, it's usual, to what problem is this a solution should be the first question you ask, really, before you jump into the AI pool, certainly. And that's why, and that's exactly, that pragmatic approach is the one I've been taking. So, and I've been applying AI in all sorts of areas, the sort of low-hanging fruit, if you want to call it that way. And we had a perfect example in your last podcast with Henry Palmer at Chewy.
Yeah. And
we did a massive content project with her because that was the right thing to do. In fact, that project, she wouldn't have gone ahead with the project if the AI solution hadn't been there, because she got, when she went out to the market to the traditional companies, they were costing it at £500,000. It was going to take 8 months and with poor output. And we did it, in a fraction of the time, and we saved her £440,000 of that £500,000 budget. We did it for 10% of the budget. And that's because the subject was right, the approach was right, and it was the right thing to do. So, and the same is true of chatbots. The interesting thing about really good chatbots is they're available 24/7, they're consistent, they reply immediately, all the sort of things that teachers cannot do. You can't be there, can't be awake 24/7. So I think when there's a problem to be solved and this is the right solution, that's when we should move towards it and its use.
What were the challenges that emerged in deploying AI for those? And how did you resolve those challenges? Because you're doing something new, there must have been unexpected things that came up as problems.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest of those projects was the wildfire content project. So it was a huge amount of content. You're talking about 50 hours worth of content, and funnily enough, let me start by saying that how it radically changed the production process, because it was very, very agile. We did this. I mean, we were producing content so quickly because the AI was doing the work. That they had a brilliant project manager, a young girl called Nikki, and she recognized very quickly that she had to tear up her old e-learning Gantt chart, like we'll take 2 weeks writing a design document, 3 weeks on a script, 6 months, you'll see something pop out. It was almost like having, e-learning projects are almost like having a baby with a gestation period of 8 months or whatever. Here, they sent us the core content through by email, and we were producing stuff, within hours and days, really. In fact, we produced stuff so quickly, she had to tear up. Her problem was dealing with the amount of content that was coming at her for quality assurance control.
Yeah.
So one thing that happened very quickly was, one, that Nikki and Henry had to get their heads around what this thing was technically and how it worked, because it was so new and different, radically different. Secondly, it produced so much content so quickly, it was like a tsunami of content. But Nikki, the project manager, was great. She got people testing herself, testing on mobile, all that sort of stuff, because they were testing the real stuff. You weren't looking at scripts, trying to imagine what this was going to look like.
Yeah.
It actually produced the stuff, so all the QA was done on real content. Now, there were remarkably few problems, and also interesting, there were no face-to-face meetings. And I've never really been involved in an e-learning project where you didn't have to meet face-to-face with people to go through those endless iterations with subject matter experts, designers, graphic designers, and so on and so forth. There wasn't a single face-to-face meeting. It was all done on Skype.
Wow.
Or asynchronous. And that was remarkable. I've never come across that before.
So a pretty COVID-friendly process, actually.
Yeah, because it was so agile, and it's cutting out all those iterations. The AI is doing a lot of the work. It produces the content immediately.
Yeah, but you pointed up an interesting problem there that happens, is that when you kind of collapse in time terms certain bits of the process, suddenly you find a whole new load of bottlenecks coming up, and the bottleneck is around what the humans have to do. So that's that's something that typically happens in chaotic situations, isn't it? Bottlenecks show up.
That's a very good observation, John. That's exactly what happened. That's why I wanted to unravel that a little bit. Funnily enough, it was so radical, it sort of flipped the whole production process. It was so agile that the front end of the process disappeared, but the back end became a real challenge. A second thing is just on quality control is, I think what was interesting is the AI caught things that humans didn't. So in the original, I'll give you a good example. This is all about, airport codes, what currency people used in countries, the geography of selling products online in the travel industry. And there was one on the European module, we did the whole world. On the European module, there was a thing that referred to Southern Ireland in the original content. Of course, this does not go down well from people who actually live in what they call Ireland or ERA.
Yeah.
And so, but the AI picked up on it actually, because it was going out and automatically linking to external content. And so, of course, it went and it was crawling around, and of course, it goes to the Wikipedia page. There is no Wikipedia page on Southern Ireland, because that's not what that state is called. But, the great thing about AI is it looks for certainty and accuracy, until it finds it. And so that was an example. We've had some, AI can make mistakes as well. In that case, it didn't, because it was mostly straightforward geography. But you have cases, the most famous one we had was in healthcare, where It was a nurse's training program using AI and video. And the recommendation for the kid, this was a children's allergy test, and whenever you prick the skin, it's painful. So you get the kid to cough or blow as a distraction technique. And so the AI, full of confidence, went and found the Wikipedia page on blow, which was the page on cocaine.
No.
So, which certainly not acceptable in the context of the NHS. But that's why we have a little quality control. We have a sort of QA check on all this stuff, because AI is, remember, competence without comprehension. It doesn't know anything.
Disambiguation is a big problem for AI, isn't it?
Yeah, although in this case, it's mostly, in that case, it's mostly accurate. In medical data, for example, hypertrophy or meningitis, all those terms are exact. It finds them no problem at all. It's when you get into
then a specialized register, it works quite well, doesn't it? It's where you kind of, where the real world impinges on that, and you get these kind of ambiguities that NLP struggles a bit.
That's correct, yeah. And this goes back to, I often describe AI as an idiot savant. In other words, it's very good at precision tasks. It's a savant. It's brilliant. It does things humans can't do. It will beat any of us at chess, poker, Go, you name it, Jeopardy. But it doesn't know it's won. So it's profoundly stupid at the same time. So on the periphery, that stupidity emerges. But that's okay, because we roughly know where that boundary is. And we can quality control to make sure it doesn't step beyond the realm. Remember, human beings are as bad, to be honest. This whole thing about bias in AI and algorithms, as if trainers and teachers are not biased. We're all biased. Kahneman got a Nobel Prize for listing about, I could right off the bat tell you about 50 biases, and we can't help it. Many of them are hardwired into our brains. So I think this idea that, there's some inherent weakness in AI because it sometimes makes mistakes is a bit of a straw man, really, because human beings make those mistakes all the time as well.
So could you talk a bit more about Total Recall, which is your latest production? Because that will be new to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, sure. So this is very interesting, because I spent a lot of time in my life, being involved with video and learning. Way back to the epic days when we even made a feature film, famous Killer Ton. But this came about, as usual, Wildfire was built on the back of really solid research. All this came out of solid cognitive science and learning theory. And then when I was doing a whole load of research on video, there were some really surprising findings. One is that video is not as good as medium for training as you might imagine. And we were getting all these companies flooding the market with sort of Netflix for training stuff. Yeah. But the reason is quite simple, and it's a very simple cognitive reason. And that's that video is a bit like a shooting star. As you have your 20 seconds of conscious working memory going through a video, and you can only keep 4 or 5 things in your head at any one time, is your memory is burning up behind you. So it's like a star coming into re-entry into our atmosphere. All your memories are getting burned up as you watch the video. By the time you got to the end, you've forgotten most of what you've seen. But it gives you the illusion of learning video. You feel as though you've learned. It's like you sit and watch I watched Wolf Hall last night with Cromwell and Henry VIII. And I felt as though I'd learned a lot about the Tudors. But if you ask me today, this morning, I can barely remember the detail now, because that's how video works. So how do we count? On the other hand, video is great for attitudinal shift, for seeing processes and procedures, seeing things that move and so on. So let's use video for that. But video is never enough on its own. So we're grabbing the transcripts of video, applying AI to those transcripts, and producing really intensely interactive experiences after you've watched the video. So you watch the video, got all that great stuff, attitudinal shift, the emotional side, seeing a process procedure. But then for the detail and what you really need to know, you immediately go into an experience that has taken that content and automatically produced an online learning experience. And I'm not talking about multiple choice questions here. I'm saying that, well, to give you an example, just finished one for a major airline. As you can imagine, that stuff stopped quite rapidly.
Yes.
And there it was technical training. So when you go out and repair an aircraft, the engineer has a piece of software on a tablet. And it says what aircraft you go to, what's wrong with it, and then you've got to fix it and pass it on for inspection. Now, that piece of software is quite complicated, but what they do is get an expert to just voice over on a laptop. It was quite basic. this is the process, this is what you click on, this is what you do next, blah, blah, blah. Now, what we did is just took those videos, chunked it down, and applied AI to it that produced really meaningful input by the user afterwards. So it might ask for complete open input, for example. We say, well, what do you do next? And you've got a blank screen, you have to type it in. No multiple choice questions, because the answer's already there. And we're using AI to semantically interpret the answers. This is a big breakthrough in online learning, to allow people to say, you ask them a question, do you know something, just as you're doing now? I give a reply, I type in what I think the answer is, and the AI does a semantic interpretation of the answer. That's way beyond multiple choice questions. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves here and say that for 30 years, the truth of the matter is that e-learning has been stuck in the multiple choice question rut.
I've worked with a lot of companies in learning technologies, but there are none I would recommend as wholeheartedly as Learning Pool. They have some of the most leading-edge, award-winning tech around, but also an approachable, honest style that means they're equally at home helping people take their first steps in digital learning. They're great with organisations small and large. They do platform, content, authoring, analytics and more, and have a 98% customer satisfaction rating. So if you have a problem to solve or an opportunity you need a can-do partner to help you make the most of, go to learningpool.com.
So AI, going back to your earlier question, how do you use AI? Well, it's many things. We can use AI to find the learning points and produce the interactive experiences. I've been using AI for text-to-speech to produce automatic little introductions and podcasts at the beginning without any sound studios. We've been using AI to interpret answers, to radically change the way in which we do retrieval practice and real learning experiences. Real teachers ask questions, real learners reply with what they think is the answer. Hardly anybody in a real classroom lecture theatre does a multiple choice question. It's an artifact of the fact that we used to have little cardboard slots with boxes for automating it. It's time to move on and use AI to do interpretation of answers, I think, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah. And how good is that interpretation of answers now? We'll have all have had experience of that, of rather frustrating conversations with Alexa, perhaps. Other voice assistants are available, or automated systems. Sometimes you feel that, oh yeah, this is you immediately feel this. The NLP here is kind of like one cell deep. It's not particularly sophisticated. It could, if I move outside the bounds, if I use a kind of unusual part of speech or whatever, it will easily get thrown. How good is the interpretation of responses now?
Well, in our experience, you're absolutely right there. I mean, we're not in training programs. You're not asking questions like, "Is there a God?" You're saying, "What were the two principles associated with this?" Blah blah blah. You're asking closed and quite narrow questions most of the time, and it's actually really good for that because there's a sort of limited domain.
Yeah.
And well, to give you an example of how good it is, it's pretty good on synonyms, for example. So we did a thing on gloving, in labs and test labs, for vaccines and so on. And there you might say you've got to inspect the gloves before you put it on, but it would accept all the synonyms like examine rather than inspect. Or and you've got to wear two pairs of gloves. You put one pair on, then another pair in case the first one's torn. And it would accept the number two, or TWO, or two pairs. In other words, it is really good at accepting all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so it's also the narrowness of the kind of knowledge domain that you're dealing with in most case training situations.
Yeah, and most training
it's much more useful than perhaps a more general kind of voice assistant would be.
That's correct, and most training is domain specific. It's not like massive open philosophical reflection and stuff. So. And you can be pretty sure that it's going to catch the right stuff there. And whether you put in the word inspect, inspected, inspecting, copes with all of that. Also, roughly what the semantic meaning of the sentence is, and so on. So it's pretty good. I mean, you have to put it through the test because sometimes it may not catch an obvious answer, but that's pretty quick. And on top of that, I mean, what's more important is does it really work? In other words, and so I'm promising higher retention because that's what the thing was built on.
Yeah.
And we had a client who really put it to the test recently, actually. So we had a random group split into half. One group did the video only, the other did video with the wildfire increased retention tool, and we had a 61% increase in retention on post-testing. And this is really massive, so because they're really doing a lot of their learning, one bite of the cherry, just watching a video once is pretty hopeless, really. We know this. But if you watch the video, then you do your online thing, and it also picks up on things you get wrong and takes you back to those to make sure you get 100% competence.
Yeah.
So you're getting a bit almost space practice there.
Coming back on something you said a bit earlier about large data banks, AI is heavily dependent on data, and it's a major theme for L&D right now. The Don Taylor survey every year, the last few years, has pointed this out, and it's an area where the L&D feels it has some challenges. So what particular issues arise for using artificial intelligence in the area of learning when it comes to this problem with data?
Okay. Well, first of all, data it's absolutely, we're sitting in the middle of a coronavirus situation here. And let's not imagine that we're going to get out of this other than by looking at the data. The scientists are looking at the data and finding an effective vaccine. We're looking at the data which will analyze why something is the case. Where did this bug come from? We'll be using data to predict what we should be doing. When should lockdown come off? When shouldn't it? When are we over the curve? We'll be prescribing things even using data. Data is a necessary condition for success when you're solving large problems. And that's what we should be thinking about in L&D. The whole LXP thing doesn't really work without AI and data, to be honest. But people, I think the real danger here is that we just default back into this very lazy, let's produce a lot of data and stick to Kirkpatrick, and we'll have some nice little pretty dashboards. The dashboard problem is a horrific cul-de-sac, because the reason people gather data in the viral example and in medicine and science is they want to do something. And this is not about dashboards, it's about decisions. And I'm seeing far too many projects that just produce nice dashboards, and L&D demand even more dashboards and even more fine-grained. And they look at them, but it doesn't matter a jot. What you should be doing is saying, how can I use this data to improve the business of learning? Now, I've been doing a lot of this in Learning Pool with Ben Betts and the HT2 people. You really have to look at a good data model here, and there's a standard data model, which is, first of all, you might want to use data to describe stuff, what is the case, what did people do during this learning experience. You'll then use it to analyze that data. That's the next step in the ladder. So description, then analysis. Why did they do this? What can we learn from the analysis? But the really interesting two are the two beyond that. So it's not describe, then analyze. It's predict. What will be the case? When will the student drop out? What don't they know? What should we be doing about it? It's the predictive thing. And then the fourth one is prescriptive, prescribing what you want to do. And this is where the really smart AI comes into play, because we can take the data sets and prescribe or predict what people are going to do. The prescription is really interesting. That's the automation of the process. So let's suppose in the workflow, we know that the organization is having problems on the sales side with a particular product feature. The data would uncover that, but it would automatically start nudging stuff towards people who have to know it. And this, rather than producing a dashboard, which lies almost inert and red, you have a dashboard in your car, but you don't sit in a room with just the dashboard. You use the dashboard while you're driving, and it tells you whether you should slow down, speed up, which you then actually do in real time. Do you need more petrol? Do you need oil? Is there a warning light? That dashboards are there for a reason, and the reason is not just to look at them. The reason is to drive more effectively.
So we should be thinking of L&D as less of a human driver with a dashboard, more of a self-driving car. In other words, that you are automating bits of the process using the data. Perhaps is that?
That's absolutely right. I think we're being too cautious with the use of data. When in your everyday life, if you're on a laptop as I am now, or you've got a mobile open, you're not seeing dashboards. What you're seeing, people are using data to recommend what movie you should be watching next on Netflix. what you should buy next if you're buying a book on Amazon. On Google, it's automatically producing highly selected results on search. The same on YouTube. On social media, everything's mediated by AI. In other words, it's going right to the top of the data ladder there and predicting and prescribing things. And that's what we should be doing in learning. Not if we get stuck at the dashboard level, all this stuff we'll spend a lot of money and not achieve much. We have to take action on the back of the data.
Immediately we start getting into ethical issues, and I can imagine a perhaps rather traditionally minded L&D person thinking, I don't want to turn my L&D into a self-driving car. I will lose control. HR and L&D tends to see ethical problems with AI very early on in the conversation. You've been, I think it's fair to say, you've been slightly dismissive of the role of ethics and AI in the past. We're in an area here where AI raises serious ethical questions for L&D and HR. Is that just techno fear, or do you think it's raising serious questions for governance?
No, I think there are seriously ethical issues around all forms of technology. There's no doubt about that. My beef on this is that, I give talks on AI all the time at conferences, and the first question you get is an ethical concern.
Yeah.
But it's quite shallow. That's my view, that most of this is what you've read in The Guardian that morning, as opposed to nobody, there are some really serious thinkers in this area, people like Russell, who are AI experts, who have written really detailed books about the ethics in AI. And these are the people that I would refer to, people like Daniel Dennett, who's a moral philosopher of some standing, But everybody's an amateur ethicist now, every man, woman, and their dog is on an ethical committee to do with AI. But the reason I don't like it is it tends to be sort of pot boiler. I've read Cathy O'Neill's book or something, as opposed to the serious work that really has been done here. Now, there are concerns, and those concerns are, first of all, I would dismiss the big existential threat. I think that's just massively exaggerated. Not
the kind of Nick Bostrom book that everyone was keen on a few years back.
Yeah, that's right. And the Bostrom book, he's an academic, quite a serious one. That's an almost impossible book to read, by the way. So, it's like it's a really badly written book. There are better books than that by better minds. But the sort of ethical concerns that matter are employment. Do we lose our humanity through this a little bit, which is a real concern at L&D? Race, gender, bias, transparency. Those are the big ticket items. Mm-hmm. However, I think people rush to conclusions. It's almost as if we want to kill AI off before it's even started, And people like Pinker and Dennett are saying, slow down here. These are mostly design problems, Unemployment, I see this at conferences all the time. 47% of jobs will be automated within the next decade. 65% of children entering primary school will be doing jobs that have yet to exist. And of course, it's complete and utter nonsense, really. One of those quotes is actually complete fiction and was just made up. The truth of the matter is, look out your window as we speak now. Who's keeping society going here? It's the nurses, the doctors, the people delivering stuff to your door, the supermarket workers, the parcel delivery folk, the people who are collecting our rubbish. Those jobs have been around for eons, and they will be around for a long time here. We really have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions on the employment thing, because technology often gives a boost to employment rather than destroying it. But it's an interesting debate rather than a big ethical issue. And I think it's right that we should address that. Yeah. The second one is the losing humanity thing, John, which is interesting. That's the most interesting one. But I would much rather that AI automated the scanning of X-rays, for lung cancer or COVID. That leaves the doctors to concentrate on the human side of their practice. In other words, AI is doing all those mundane things that people do and leaving the time up to, and the same is true in learning. We should be using AI to do the mundane stuff, take the weight off the shoulders of lecturers and teachers, for example, so they can concentrate on good feedback and teaching. And we had a perfect example of that with the Georgia Tech bot, which was a teaching assistant bot. They swapped it out for one of the 9 teaching assistants, and the students loved it because it was consistent. When they asked it a question, it came back immediately, 24/7, whereas the normal faculty member was taking days, sometimes weeks to reply. So let the AI do the good stuff and allow the human beings. It frees up human time to do human things. The other two, race is an interesting one. There is this myth that you hear this all the time. Well, it's just a bunch of white kids coding away, and they don't know anything. Oh, hold on.
The racist soap dispenser was an example given.
Well, the racist. I've heard that one so often now. Of course, that was just that it had an infrared sensor. You just readjust and recalibrate the sensor. It's no big deal. This, it's not.
It's a quick fix, in other words, for a lot of.
Well, it's such an anthropomorphic thing. The idea that the idea that the dispenser is racist in itself, as it were, this abstraction of racism into the thing. All you need to do, it was a mistake. Okay, fine, we fix it. These things happen, but the good thing is you can go in and fix it. What Kahneman showed is that almost all human beings are inherently racist, and you can't fix that very easily, which is why diversity training doesn't work very well. At least AI has a chance. We have a process of continuous improvement because it doesn't know or care what race you are. We can improve the design so it doesn't know what gender, race. The fact that I'm male and Scottish doesn't matter to it. We can eliminate a lot of these biases if we're clever here with AI and learning, especially. I mean, I think this idea that well, first of all, that they're all white programmers. If you look at the top 6 AI companies in the world, 3 are led by Chinese people. The other 2, Microsoft and Google, are led by 2 people who were born and educated in India. Yeah, this white coders thing is a bit. I always find it quite comical. I was at Stanford in Silicon Valley this year. I mean, you can't move for. It was the most multicultural place I've been in for ages. You can't move for techies who have come from those backgrounds. And then on the gender thing, I think that's more serious, but it's a different sort of problem, really. But there's clearly biases at schools, which I think are human biases, and almost subtly steering girls away from STEM subjects. But when you want to say, well, let's tackle that problem, you get another group of people saying, well, we can't have everybody doing STEM, but then you can't have everything. I thought the gender debate was. I went to this really fascinating debate called the Institute of Ideas.
Yeah.
And on gender, there was this amazing panel on sex toys. The sort of doll thing, sex doll thing.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was an amazing debate, mainly because there was one ethicist who wanted to ban all sex dolls off the bat because it objectified women. Fair enough point. And, people were nodding away. Until then, the debate moved suddenly and said, well, hold on. If that's true, you also have to ban all dildos because they objectify men. And then suddenly the debate gets very interesting. In other words, so people going, yeah, that's right. And this is the danger here, I think, that suddenly, we come out with these, a lot of these ethical committees and universities that come out with these lists like Moses written in tablet, you shall not do this, you shall not do that, without really having thought it through.
You've been heavily involved in the debates over learning theory, and as I said, I'd like to talk further about that maybe in another podcast, and the scientific underpinnings of learning design. And what we tended to see is that every time a new development in learning technologies comes along, or the latest bright, shiny new idea like learning experience design and so on, suddenly all the kind of wisdom of ages on ID goes out the window, and people like yourself and Leonard Hooks start having a fit on your blogs and saying, just remember the basic principles and here and so on. What sort of problems do you think might come up as AI moves into the production process of learning content, for instance, and learning systems with learning design?
Very good question, John. Yeah. I think what really matters here is to think that. So what we need is, like, learning is a messy, difficult process. It's really difficult. You just have to create the right context for people to learn. You can't really push it that far or people just rebel. But I think we have a real chance of changing things for the better here in terms of learning theory. So traditionally, let's not pretend that, text, graphics, video, loosely punctuated by multiple choice questions, has paid a huge amount of attention to really good learning theory. By and large, it's a bit faddish and a bit shallow and a bit linear and a bit predictable. We finally have a chance to pick up on all those brilliant findings in cognitive science, retrieval practice, interleaving, spaced practice. There are a whole rack of things here that we can learn from people like Sweller. Richard Mayer has 500 studies in online learning. We really can take that stuff and embed them using AI, because what these people are saying is, listen, less is more, space practice works, blah, blah, blah. But you have to embed that in our e-learning somehow. Now, you can't do that by simply producing a fairly linear experience with a few if-then statements and some multiple choice questions. To be fair, I don't mind some of that stuff because we did the best with the tools we had. Unfortunately, the tools tend to be limiting what we can do rather than opening things up. So we had the debate about video earlier. We have a chance now of embedding, because most sophisticated learning theory is quite algorithmic. Spaced practice is a sort of logarithmic pattern of allowing you to have several bites of the cherry so that it eventually gets shunted from working to long-term memory over time. Now, you can't really do that in classrooms or lecture rooms, or you can do it crudely. But we have a chance here of embedding that into a good personalized algorithmic approach that feeds you a spaced practice pattern over time that's suited to you. That's what Duolingo does. That's why people love it when they come back to Duolingo, and it knows that you've forgotten stuff. How cool is that? Because that's the truth. Learning theory tells us that we'll forget everything. And yet we still have these one-off e-learning programs, one-off lectures, not even recorded, bizarrely, that don't give people second bites of the cherry. So I think we have a chance in AI to embed sophisticated patterns and habits and nudges and all sorts of things in these newer systems in a way we could never do before. Smart solutions to learning as opposed to linear and flat solutions to learning.
Okay, so we have a chance to get it badly wrong with AI, but we also have a chance to get it radically right, perhaps for the first time, which is interesting. So what's next, Donald? What new groundbreaking developments do you expect to see in using AI for learning? Now, okay, we've had content production, we've had total recall, which you talked about, and we've had recommender systems in LXPs, but where next do you think?
So I've just finished a book on AI and learning that will be published this year. And interestingly, the final chapter was around this what's next, this gaze into the future. And who knows what will happen in AI? It's moving so quickly and in a sense unpredictably. But in terms of the learning world, there are some things that are absolutely fascinating. And I know this will sort of worry people, but we certainly have a lot of companies now looking at either invasive or non-invasive techniques into the brain to get rid of the interfaces or make it as frictionless as possible. So the non-invasive techniques are sort of little helmets and things you can wear, or reading brainwaves. And, that might repulse us ethically when we first come across it. But if somebody came along to you and said, listen, you can put this helmet on and you can learn a language in 2 weeks for $50, would you say no? There's no medical side effects. Would you say no to that if that happened? The invasive techniques that people like Musk are working on, neural laces and so on, some interesting things happening there again. And many of those things are to do with helping people with brain damage or disabilities. So, we shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, before we take a little look at these things, because sometimes they have really medical benefits. But
that's very exciting, Donald. But are you seriously suggesting that the next thing we have after total recall, which is out there now in the wild, is you've actually done it? It's not a blue sky thing. The next thing is going to be direct to brain interfaces.
Well, I'm not saying this is not near term, but for example, if you read the papers, there's a really fascinating paper published last year where all they did was train people up on a task, which is a skill set, problem-solving task. And all they did was reinforce it while people were sleeping into the REM periods.
Yeah.
And then they tested them on wake up, and they found that they really had picked stuff up and could apply that knowledge in novel situations. So I think there's some interesting things about how we learn, accelerating that efficiently. And this is not all science fiction. You can actually do some of this stuff already. There are companies, this is why people are repulsed, but in China, they're already, BrainCo, for example, will put little headsets on kids in the class, and it will tell you whether they're paying attention or not. It's actually just reading EEG. It's almost like reading volume or noise. It's quite crude. Nevertheless, if behavior in your classroom is a problem, then there are some solutions to that, perhaps, because it's really difficult keeping an eye on 35 kids simultaneously.
Yeah.
So that stuff is, let's not imagine that this is going to happen in 10 years' time. This is all happening as we speak.
Okay.
I think the interesting one was face recognition. People really objected to the images I show. I put people through a moral test when I give talks now. I show them an image of kids on face recognition, and people go, "Oh, you can't have that in schools." But supposing I put the following argument to you: why don't we just do class registration using face recognition as they come into the school? It's instantaneous. You can keep the data safe and secure, and teachers don't have to take a register. My kids went to a secondary school where they spent 20 minutes, 5 days a week, taking the register every day. What a waste of time. Why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to just instantly recognize the kids as they come into the school through the gate?
Yeah.
So sometimes these solutions, just take the weight off teachers, take the workload off teachers, and we can't have it both ways. You can't say, I want to reduce workload, but I'm not going to use that stuff because I don't like it.
Yeah.
I think we have to loosen up a little bit on this if we're going to make good progress. There are plenty of other intermediate things. I think sentiment analysis, and it was this interpretation of text within an organization to see what people like and don't like, where the weaknesses and strengths are is good. Natural language processing, the voice interface stuff is getting so good so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, even with my accent, I use my Alexa all the time now. I've got it linked to my television, all my music, my robot vacuum cleaner, my timers, everything. Once you get into the habit of using voice, that's a really interesting thing because AI has allowed it to happen.
Yeah, and the way it learns is good and learns your voice.
That's right. The more you use it, the better it becomes.
My wife complains that Alexa obeys me, but doesn't obey her. And it's the opposite way around with the dog, so that's okay. She says the dogs are more intelligent than Alexa.
Well, this is definitely true. Go back to this competence without comprehension. The dog, it's interesting. When I look at my dog, the great thing about my dog is I know Descartes was wrong. Dogs are very, very smart. They have sort of brains and problem-solving brains, whereas the robot, my robot that comes out, it does a great job in sweeping the dust up, but it doesn't know shit. It doesn't know anything, The dog will win every time. So you have a point.
On that note, let's start. I hope it's not, a final end. It'd be great to have you back for another one.
It's good.
We've got so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Donald. I'll let you get on with your life and dog walking and all the rest of it. It's been really great, really fascinating discussion. Thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thank you, John. Been a pleasure.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Thanks a lot to Donald and to our sponsors, Learning Pool. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to get future episodes automatically. And if you're keen to help other people find us as well, please give a review and a 5-star rating. If you want to sponsor or give any feedback, you can reach me at John Helmer on Twitter or through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com. Next time we have Juliet Denny of Growth Engineering talking about psychology and learning. Don't miss it. Bye for now.
Now I finally get it.
Good morning, John.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well. I love the background.
Is it suitably apocalyptic?
That's very good. Yes, I like it.
Cheesy and trashy.
Yeah, that's what I like. I hate it when people try to go all pro on that, because it is what it is. It's a bit cheesy and trashy. That's what I like the fun ones, really.